Well, we've hit the midpoint of our class, and that means from this point forward, we're going to talk about the importance of Western history with regard to Europe and its involvement. So we need to move into European history, and in particular, take a look at the Renaissance and the Reformation. Why this period? It's often called the beginning of the modern era. But before we get too far into our discussion, let's start with that which comes before, that early part of European history. It's difficult really to say when European history begins. It's certainly cooking with Stonehenge, right? We've taken a look at England and Stonehenge way back in perhaps the first, even the second millennium BC. But for the most part, for a lot of European history, Europe is dominated by the Greeks, by the Romans, and a variety of tribal groups, a variety of groups who have Germanic language bases, Celtic language bases, Nordic languages. And so what we have here are, I'm going to stop there. So we're moving on to Europe. We've been hanging out in the various river civilizations all over the world. We've taken a quick look at Islam and some of the other cultures coming out of the Middle East. And now it's time to go to Europe and see what contributions Europe makes to the history of science and technology, science and society. It's really the Renaissance and the Reformation where we really get cooking. But before that, there's certainly things to know about Europe and its culture and its history. Europe comes a little late to the civilization table, but that doesn't mean their impact isn't significant. Early on, European culture, European society is really hard to define. It is dominated by the Greeks, it's dominated by the Romans, and also by, as you can see from this map, several tribes, several territorial groups. Some of them you may know the term Celts, you may know the Franks, the Danes, the Saxons, and such. Most of these folks are territorial. They're moving around Europe looking for good hunting ground, looking for good farming land, trying to avoid maybe calamities of weather, calamities of invasions from other peoples, and particularly the Roman Empire. Around the 5th century AD, the 5th century of the Common Era, the 400s, the Roman Empire finally shakes down, finally collapses, and what you're left with in Europe are a large group of Germanic and Celtic-speaking peoples who are trying to establish some kind of order. So, that being said, let's take a little look at the chronology of Europe as a whole, because that'll kind of center us, if you will, as we continue our discussion. So the folks we've just described pretty much dominate the early Middle Ages. This is this period from 500 to 1000. We're looking for the development of cities here. We're looking for some kind of common cultural bond, looking for scientific thinking, looking for technological development, having a hard time finding it. Folks often see the early Middle Ages as the Dark Ages, and that's because writing certainly is going on, but it's difficult to come by. It's difficult to see what kind of technological innovations are happening during this time period. Not to worry, we'll find some of them. During the High Middle Ages, this is that time period from 1000 to 1300, the High Middle Ages are a time when most historians start to say, ooh, we're starting to see that civilization thing happening. We see cities being developed, we see monumental architecture, we start to see the beginnings of centers for learning. So the High Middle Ages are really, no pun intended, a high point in early European history. The Late Middle Ages, Europe takes a hit. It's a hit to the, it's a kick in the gut, really it is. We'll see how Europe gets hit by things like the Black Plague and warfare, and really sort of sets Europe back on its heels for a little while. That's why when the Renaissance comes along in the 1400s, people see this time period as a period of rebirth, of recovery. So this is our basic chronology. Early Middle Ages, 500s to 1000, High Middle Ages, 1000 to 1300, late 1300 to 1400s, Renaissance beginning in the 15th century. So these early Middle Ages, dominated by Several things. Most people see it's a formation period where you get old Greco-Roman culture kind of still there, but maybe difficult to find. Germanic culture, whatever that means, that's the peoples, the way they live, and then the advent of Christianity. We think Germanic cultural, primarily that folks are hunters. They're engaged in small-scale agriculture. They do indeed develop village life, if you will, where we can find archaeological evidence of small permanent dwellings. They're polytheistic in culture. We've seen that before. They are tribal in their political organization. It seems to be the big man, the big chief, the fellow who's the best hunter, the best warrior, who tends to dominate. This is indeed a warrior culture. And again, as McClellan and Dorn tell you, you can see this start to play out as European history goes on in sort of our military and political organization of Europe. Roman culture is still hanging around. It's a little tougher to find. Latin, still a language of the church, a language of law. It's tough to find, but it's still there, hanging around. And what's interesting to me is these concepts of political power. We often see the term Kaiser for a king in Germany. That's just a Germanic working of the name Caesar. Kaiser, Caesar. The same with the term Tsar out of Russia. So the language, maybe it's oral, maybe it's not written, and the concepts of power are still there, right? Architecture, technology, those Roman roads are still there, those Roman aqueducts are still there, the Roman Colosseum is still there today, right? So a lot of those influences are still there. Now, the Europeans coming in may not necessarily know how to maintain them, may not know how to work them, but they're going to serve as inspiration for their later development. And then finally, the ultimate religion of Roman society, Christianity, will come to be a big factor in the development of European history. In particular, Europe is going to move from this polytheistic, sort of naturalistic approach to religion to a monotheistic form of religion. And we credit Saint Benedict, depicted here from this manuscript page, as being the one who starts this movement. He crafts these monastic houses. Pope Gregory the Great will plant these houses out in Europe proper and start to get evangelical leaders out there in Europe bringing forward this new Christianity. It'll take 500 years, from about 500 to 1,000. But once the Christians get the last Viking king around 1,000, it's pretty clear that Christianity is going to come to Europe. It's going to stay. So monotheism comes to Europe. As we move into the High Middle Ages, we'll start to see some of the divisions within Europe, state-wise, politically, that we start to see otherwise, that we start to see even today. It's this High Middle Ages where we start to see, and certainly there's so much to do. This is a course in and of itself, but it's in the High Middle Ages that for our purposes, when we're looking for the origins of science and society, when we're looking for technology, we start to see things kind of coming together. In particular, the institutions and the activities that we associate with civilization. For example, universities are going to start to develop in the High Middle Ages. The High Middle Ages are a time of stability, a time of economic growth, and society has the opportunity to actually send some of their sons, in particular at the beginning, to have a life of relative leisure, to study law, to study theology. They're able to do this because they don't have to keep fighting enemies. They don't have to keep scrambling to procure food. So we know that we have a certain level of stability, if you will, in Europe. Again, this isn't going to happen until, we said before, around 1,000 to 1,300. So it's going to take a while as compared to, say, other civilizations that we've already studied. Cathedrals. You have an image here of one of the great cathedrals in France. This is Chartres. This was an example of monumental building in the European tradition. The monumental building in the European tradition, by the time we get to it, will be Christian. Right? Because we have Christianized Europe by the time 1,000 rolls around. So extraordinary architectural and engineering feats coming into the High Middle Ages. And then the Crusades. The High Middle Ages also marked by the Crusades. This is an international global war, right? This is European forces versus Asian forces battling it out over who will have leadership of Western Asia, also known as the Holy Lands. So, warfare based in religion, warfare based in territorial access and control to very important religious sites. And it's also going to mean that for our purposes in this discussion of science and society, that we're going to see ideas coming from the world of Islam, as we've seen in previous selections, start to make their way into Europe in a big way. So the Crusades, the High Middle Ages, this is a period of growth, stability, trade, warfare, great building projects, great intellectual activity. Much of this gets stymied, if you will, gets blocked, if you will, with regard to the late Middle Ages. It is a tough time for Europe. This is a modern rendition of the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. We have heard, we have primary sources coming out of this time period where monks, scholars are thinking that it's it. This is the end of time as we know it. They have recorded great periods of famine. They record great periods of pestilence. This is the Black Death, the Black Plague, probably coming out of Asia into Europe. It's a period of great warfare. In this particular case, we've got the French and the English going at each other over who should control big chunks of Europe and England, and this is the 100 Years' War. All of this culminates in death, and the biblical passage focusing on how death rides a white horse. Here is death here, yeah. So there are estimates in the late Middle Ages and this terrible 14th century that approximately 50% of the population of Europe succumbed either to famine or plague or war, and that's a pretty conservative estimate. It may have been as much as 70%. So that's why when we get to the Renaissance era, people see this as a time of rebirth, a time of renewal, a time of recovery. Why Renaissance? Why 1450? Typically that's the date. In 1450 we have the end of the 100 Years' War. In 1453, precisely the end of the 100 Years' War, in 1453 we get the printing press, Gutenberg's printing press. Finally developed, that technology coming to the fore. In 1453, we also get the fall of Constantinople. That is the last bastion, the last evidence that the Roman Empire is still kicking on in the Greek world. And when Constantinople falls in 1453, we get a significant number of Greek scholars leaving. They find they're Christian, they're Greek, they find they can't live under Islamic power, Islamic control, and so they leave Constantinople and they head for Rome. They head for northern Italy because this is where they understand they can go. So when they do this, they bring in all of these texts that they've been preserving. These fellows don't travel without their books, and so they bring in all of their Aristotle, their Plato. They also bring in Arabic texts on philosophy, on ethics, on science, on math. So we're going to start to see an influx of extraordinary knowledge, and that's one of the reasons the Renaissance happens at this time. Again, the 100 Years' War ends, the printing press is finished, it's up and running, and Constantinople falls, all in the same year of 1453. The three things come together to set up a storm of new ideas. I have on this slide, what does it mean to be Renaissance? And it seems what starts to happen is when all of these new ideas, at least new for the Romans, new for the Italians, new for Europeans, come into their culture, they think, whoa, wow, look at this information. We've never studied this before. And they start to look at the ancient past. And they start to look at it, what does it mean for them? So they look at the ancient past and they look at it critically. They look at it critically and they try to understand how that ancient past, some of it was theirs, right? Some of this is information about the Greek world, the Roman world, that stories and battles and empires that took place right here where we are. And they've sort of lost an understanding of that, filtered through the Dark Ages. And so they're trying to understand how that past relates to who they are, relates to themselves. And they, in the process, by looking at the past, looking at it critically, understanding how that past relates to themselves, they fashion something new. So the Renaissance, a new era, a new time. We mentioned that a lot of this begins in Italy. This begins in northern Italy, and this is a map of northern Italy. Please know that Italy was not a country as it is today. Italy was a series of kingdoms, republics, as this map suggests, and then the papal states themselves. So the church held a large piece of Italy back in the day, and then lots of kingdoms, republics. You have the Duchy of Milan, or the Dukedom, if you prefer, of Milan. So all these independent states, most of these cities made their way by trade. This is also the beginning of the era of exploration, right? This is also the period of Christopher Columbus, who will be part of Genoa, sort of over here to the western part of Italy. Well, one of the things that we're always thinking about with regard to the Renaissance, and if you've had your art class, you know this to be true, the Renaissance represents a new way of looking at things. And so we said, right, you look at the past and try to figure out how it applies to you. You get inspired by ancient ideas, ancient forms, ancient history. And I have this image for you here because this is a typical image of medieval art. This comes from a manuscript. And as you can see, there's sort of an overseer directing people to farm. And when you look at the art, you sort of do this two-dimensional approach. Some things are kind of flat. The faces are looking at you fully, as opposed to this one fellow's in profile. Yeah, mostly. But it's a very almost cartoonish approach to art. When we get to the Renaissance, this is what we get. Right, this is Michelangelo's famous Sistine Chapel. I've always thought this image a great example of the Renaissance because it sort of shows something of the power of art, but also the potential of man. Right, there's an amazing thing going on here. You got Adam sort of reclined, supine, sort of not very active, and he will be though. Right? He will be. He's created by God. God is swooping in with all of this motion, with this host of angels or heavenly beings behind him, yes? And he's coming forward, and we're just about to see God touch the hand of Adam. And when he does, Adam's going to spring into life. Right? So there is this interesting connection between the Renaissance and Christianity. Michelangelo captures this beautifully here, that human beings as the epitome of God's creation. Right? God gave human beings dominion over the earth. God gave human beings dominion over nature. Keep that in mind when you're thinking of science, right? God gave human beings dominion over nature. And where it's about to happen, right here in this picture, is that spark that's just about to happen, that connection to God is just about to happen, that gives man that dominion. So a great image. Another image from Michelangelo, one of my personal favorites. This is the Pietà. You'll find this in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome at the Vatican. And again, when you think about the technology it used, when you think about the craftsmanship here, this is extraordinary art in comparison to what was going on before. So this Renaissance era is a complete break with the art of the past. It's extraordinary. The Pietà, the Mother of God, Mary, looking young as she was perhaps when Christ was born, having the adult Christ figure draped across her in agony, in death. A really touching piece. So Michelangelo is Renaissance. He's from northern Italy. He's inspired by classical Greek art forms, the kind of sculpture, right, that we know of from classical Greek art. He's inspired by Christian themes. And he liked to try everything. That's another hallmark of the Renaissance, is going after everything, thinking about the big picture. And so he worked in sculpture, he worked in architecture, and certainly in painting. Yeah. Leonardo da Vinci, also a great Renaissance figure for lots of reasons and important for us in this class. You know this image. This is the Last Supper. You know this amazing picture. The thing that is, of course, interesting to me as a historian is that we've taken this very ancient scene, this very Christian scene of the Last Supper, and we've placed it at an Italian supper table in an Italian villa. And in the background, if we could see that far into the background, you would see the Italian countryside. Now, we're pretty sure that Leonardo da Vinci didn't have any secret history that said Christ came to Italy for his Last Supper. We think that he just placed this very important scene, this very impressive concept, into a context that the people who would be viewing it would understand. So again, taking ideas, inspirations from the past, from the Christian past, and trying to present them in a way that make them understandable for us today. So Da Vinci is Renaissance himself. He's from Florence, northern Italy. He's a painter, yes, but he's also a mathematician. He's also an inventor. You probably know his notebooks, and McClellan and Dorn will give you lots of information there, so please take a look. There's another video that talks about his Vitruvian Man available in this folder. He thought that birds were amazing creatures, right? Tiny little brains. He dissected them, so he knew. They could fly. Human beings can't fly. We have these amazing brains. We are the epitome of God's creation. We have the ability to command nature, but we can't fly. So he invented flying machines. He studied the movements of dragonflies and put in his notebooks a depiction of a helicopter. The same with fish. He thought fish, they see so much of the world. They can go underwater. They have tiny brains. They are so unimportant, he thought, in the great scheme of things. Yet they see so much that we can't see, that we can't observe. They do so much. So he invented a diving bell. Now, did he get these things made? Did they get to fly? Did they get to go underwater? No, but he is noodling. He is thinking about what he can do. So Da Vinci, a Renaissance man, a great painter, an artist, an architect, an inventor. Again, he's a mathematician. His notebooks attest to that and reveal that to be Renaissance is to be interested in so many things. Copernicus. Here we go into our history of science and society. Copernicus, a Renaissance man. Not out of Italy this time out of Poland. The Renaissance is moving north. It's starting to have impact farther than just Italy. Through the printing press, through the universities that we have now in Europe. So here it comes. Copernicus, you know, from Poland, also a mathematician, did many things. You have a video that relates to Copernicus and the scientific revolution. Take a look. He was a monk, so he's a religious man. He was in the court of the royalty of Poland, so he was an ambassador. He was a diplomat of some sort. He liked to do the star charts for the Queen of Poland, so he was an astrologer. So he was a fellow who dealt in so many different things. And in particular, he got hold of, as you know, from all of the videos you looked at on Islamic tradition, the videos you've looked at, I hope by now, on other traditions, he got hold of both the Greek and the Muslim interpretations of the solar system, right? He saw those who argued that the Earth was stationary. He saw those that argued that the Earth was not stationary, and he began to question. So he looked at the past, he looked at it critically, and he found that the math just did not work. And so he began the process of trying to revise, trying to make sense of it for his own time. So you have here on this list, again, 15th century Poland. He's a mathematician. He was able to review the work of ancient scholars and medieval scholars. He revised the math, and he came up with what we now accept as the heliocentric thesis or the heliocentric theory. Again, we have more to say on this. So, and please read your McClellan and Dorn. This is just an introduction to the Renaissance and the Reformation and the scientific revolution. But here we are. And as you'll recall, Copernicus not the first to say that the sun is the center of our universe, but rather that is the first in Christian Europe to claim this. The Renaissance and Reformation is also the age of exploration. And so we have mentioned this already, and here is our Christopher Columbus. He's from northern Italy. He's a map maker. He is interested in mathematics, and we think that he's motivated by a sense of adventure, by a desire to pursue knowledge, perhaps to get wealthy, and also to spread the word of Christianity. As we said before, he is a good example of the Renaissance as well. He's from northern Italy, the city of Genoa. He can't find anybody to support his goals in Italy, so he's going to have to go elsewhere. But he's very well known as a cartographer and quite good at map making. So again, in our quest for science, technology, how we're using information, he is going to be able to, sailing is now going to be able to use technology gained from both Arabic and Chinese cultures, so navigation, ship's rudders, and his goal is to try to avoid the Arabic traders, the Muslim traders, who kind of have a monopoly on the overland spice trade routes through Asia. He wants to try to go around the continent of Africa to get to India. And he's, as the Portuguese have been doing, but he's also suggesting that if we go straight east, if we go straight due east, we can bypass that long trip around Africa and go right to China that way, China and India in that regard. He convinces the Spanish. This is Ferdinand and Isabella. He convinces them to give him patronage, to give him funding. So, the Age of Discovery, funded by the state of Spain, to try to find a new route to the spices of Asia. We're taking a look at a map of 1474. You know that Columbus sailed in 1492. And the orange that you see is what Europeans thought would happen if you sailed due east. So here is Portugal and Spain, right? Here's England and Ireland. Here are the Antilles, these islands off the coast of Spain. Well, Canaries are off the coast of Spain. Sorry, the Antilles are here. They had gotten that far. They thought if you just kept going east, you'd eventually get to the islands off the coast of India and China. What they didn't understand were the continents here, North America and South America, right? So there you have it. Off they go, and this is what Columbus was expecting. He was wrong about the size of the earth and about the existence of the Americas. This map just shows the voyages that he took, and as you know, Columbus went on multiple voyages. He was indeed successful. He died thinking if he could only just go one more time, he could figure out a way to get past Panama, and he'd make it. He'd make it. So he really thought that he was just there, getting to India. Never quite had a full understanding of what was going on here with the two continents. Well, let's take a break here, and we'll start a new video with the Reformation and see how the Reformation also plays into our ideas about science, the scientific revolution, and society.